let me introduce Marty Nemko. He holds a PhD from UC Berkeley with dual specializations in educational psychology and the evaluation of innovation. He subsequently taught at UC Berkeley. In addition to being a career coach, his writing credits include 13 books, including What's the Big Idea? 39 Reinventions for a Better America. His 4,000 articles include annual predictions in Time, a column in The Atlantic, an 8-part series, What's the Big Idea, in Washington Post, and a number of articles in the Mensa Bulletin and the Life Well Led column in The Intelligencer. Here to share his wishes for 2021 and beyond, I give you Dr. Marty Nemko.
Thank you very much, Michael. First, I want to thank you, Michael. You have been giving service to Mensa for about as long as I've been a member, and it's a thankless job, and I want to thank you for that. Pia, thank you if you're there for inviting me. Lana for being a competent webmaster, and most of all, to you, all of you. I mean, we are all, and this is a new term, I don't think anybody's used this term until recently, zoomed out. We are all zoomed out, and yet you've chosen to give some of your Sunday to yet another Zoom. I will do my best to make it make it worth your while. COVID, Jesus, I really, I look forward to a time when COVID masks are like museum pieces and nothing more. But right now, even me, I'm far from a fashionista. I have masks in varying colors to match my outfit. It's not a good sign. Anyway, all right, I should be good. I have at least 7 wishes, but I'm going to, in the interest of time and making sure we have time for Q&A at the end, there are 7 wishes I have for 2021 and beyond that I thought might be of interest to you guys, and I'll just list them quickly. First is, I think we do need more respect for the marketplace of responsibly held ideas, less censorship. I think number 2 would be that we need what I would call, to this group, more Mensa-like policy regarding COVID. 3, even before COVID, we desperately needed more innovative approaches to creating jobs. I'll share what are my best thoughts on that. Number 4, my wish is that we reinvent education. Number 5, that we reinvent our system of electing people. It's hard to believe that our 2 presidential candidates were the best that America has to offer. Number 6, I'm going to argue for replacing the income tax and all the hassle and time and cheating that goes on with that with a VAT, a value-added tax. And finally, that we adopt the most important lesson that my dad ever told me. I'll tell you more about that later. All right, let us begin. Okay, where do I want to start? Okay, I want to start from the personal. It came to my attention. I've had a troll for 29 years who, without going into details, is very smart. And every time I do anything publicly, she, and I do believe it's a she, it could be a he, chooses to try to use the ultimate way of destroying somebody these days, calling you a racist, a sexist, etc. So, for example, before this Mensa presentation, she wrote to the National and she wrote to Michael. And by the way, thank you, Michael, for not exerting censorship. I wrote an article called "White Male Shouldn't Be an Epithet," and I'm very proud of that. And for the first time in 30 years of being on NPR, etc., I actually had unbridled anger because my dad, who is an immigrant, a Holocaust survivor, had a little tiny store in a terrible neighborhood in Brooklyn. And 3 times, in the middle of the night, my family got a phone call that somebody had thrown a Molotov cocktail, a rag with a gasoline on it, down the chimney of my father's store, and it was burned to a crisp 3 times because he was the only Jew in that neighborhood. And so for the first time in 30 years, I was angry in a little podcast that nobody listens to, but for 30 seconds, I got really angry at the idea that what has happened to hundreds of small businesses like my dad's was not called arson, was not called violence, it was called protest or even just unrest. So yes, I was angry. I like to think that I'm entitled to do that. Next. It makes me sad that we're seeing statues of people like George Washington and even Abraham Lincoln torn down. It makes me sad that the media censors tremendously people who dare question the wisdom of today's orthodoxy. They may risk getting fired. I think about James Damore, who got fired merely for saying that he felt that Google was an ideological echo chamber. Brett Weinstein, another self-described progressive, who wrote a letter to the Evergreen State University faculty where he was a professor, in which he simply objected to what they call a day of absence, which now asked white participants to stay off campus and instead attend a training on white privilege. He was forced to resign. I was a columnist, as Michael said, at Time magazine. I had written 9 essays, including annual predictions for the next year. And I was a fair-haired boy. They kept hiring me again and again and again and again. And then I dared write an essay in favor of Israel, making the case for Israel. Not only did they not publish it for the first time, they published 19 out of 19 in a row. But that 20, not only did they not publish it, but they never even responded to my emails and never hired me again. And I've been reading about an increased number of people getting fired for even just saying all lives matter. Cisco employees, the Sacramento Kings announcer Grant Napier, the media double standard. Whenever I watch CNN, I see softballs to liberal interviewees and really toughness on conservative interviewees. I look at commercials, I look at sitcoms, I look at movies, and disproportionately, white males are portrayed as evil or foolish. This is all accelerating with Facebook, Google, and Twitter, for example, censoring even an article by Manhattan Institute scholar. I'll just simply say that when articles in the Wall Street Journal are banned, and Google and Amazon and Facebook have now banned Parler, the website created to be a conservative alternative to them. And just today on Sunday News Show, Senator Marco Rubio said appropriately, we're now living in a country where 4 or 5 companies, unelected, this is a quote, I wrote it down to make sure I get it right. We're now living in a country where 4 or 5 companies, unelected, unaccountable, have the monopoly power to decide we're going to wipe people out, we're going to erase them from any digital platform. So, reiterating again, my first wish for 2021, that we all exert more care with the censorship scythe, and more respect for the full range of responsibly held ideas. My wish number 2. I wish we had what I'm calling more Mensa-like policy regarding COVID. The states that have locked down have had little or no better results regarding COVID than states that have had heavy lockdowns and at huge costs. I think of all the people who have lost jobs, closed businesses, have gone just stir crazy at home, increased drug abuse, increased child abuse, increased weight gain, increased depression, increased suicide. I feel that the medical metric has been too dominant in the decisions as to how much to shut down. For example, the ICU metric, the number of cases, the number of capacity remaining in the ICU. Of course, there will be some lives saved if we make sure that there is plenty of space available in the ICUs. But when we think about it, most of the people with COVID who went into the ICU had severe underlying conditions and were older. And so even if we save their lives, average statistically, they will live for a relatively few years more and die of often more prolonged diseases like strokes that leave them in a vegetated state or horrible cancers, leaving not only them tormented, but their family. I like to think that we need to look at the full we do look at it, but I think we need to take what I'm calling a more Mensa-like approach, a more full-dimensioned approach to how we assess the calculus of what and how much and where to shut down. It may be that certain zip codes need to be shut down and others don't, but we're doing it also not granularly enough by a state. Anyway, so that's number two. I wish for my second wish for 2021 and beyond is a more Mensa-like policy, more full dimension policy regarding COVID. Number three, even before COVID, we needed more good quality jobs. And I feel we've not been innovative enough. And certainly COVID has made it a lot worse, all the job loss that comes from that, but even before. And so my three favorite ideas for a more innovative approach to creating jobs is first what I call an entrepreneurial army. I am the last guy in the world who'd be a fan of unethical businesses, and there have been plenty of them and plenty of disgusting behavior. But ethical entrepreneurship that does consider, and this is, now I'm going to sound like the part of me that is a liberal, which is I love the idea of the three-part definition of profit: products, profits, people, and planet. I want to train ethical entrepreneurs because when you create a new business that's ethical, you create better products and services for all of us and lots of jobs. So from kindergarten, and it's having lemonade stands, to graduate school, I'm a huge fan of creating what I call an entrepreneurship army. There should be a great curriculum, practical, hands-on, that teaches ethical entrepreneurship. The second part of my three-part plan for increasing the number of jobs is what I call the assistance army. Now, many of, the rich have long used assistance to make their lives easier. And the middle class, though, can often afford at least small part-time amounts, like homework helpers for their kids, somebody to wait for the Comcast guy or woman to come over, domestic chores, errands. And I think more people could do it if it was more part of their consciousness. So I think there needs to be both government and private sector initiative, public relations campaign to encourage people to hire part-time assistants. That would create millions, not great jobs, but they're all ethical, doable by a large swath of the population. That's what I call creating an assistance army. And the third part of my thoughts about job creation is not about creating jobs, but again, the liberal side of me does not like the excess materialism that causes everything from unethical behavior in the workplace to an environmental problems. So when I see people with 3 SUVs or living on with 3 houses, and there is something wrong with that. Intellectually, we know that you can't shop your way into contentment, and yet many people do. And so I would encourage an education program in the school, in our society's mind molders, the schools, the colleges, and the media, as the value of non-materialistic lifestyle. Happiness is much more likely, I'm not saying you live in poverty, but once beyond a basic middle-class income, happiness is far more likely to derive from relationships, creative outlet, and good work than buying a yacht. And so I think that kind of an education campaign would result in people not needing to get such good jobs. They could live reasonably on the kind of jobs I was describing in the assistance army, or other jobs that aren't very lucrative, but nonetheless can allow a decent standard of living. No need to be a bond trader, at least as far as I'm concerned. So that's my third wish for 2021, more innovative approaches to job creation. My fourth wish for 2021 and beyond is to reinvent education. Even independent of COVID, people quietly, while we say that education is our greatest hope, it's the greatest promise, we have for 50, 60 years quite heavily funded education. In America, we spend number 1 or number 2 per capita on education in the world, and yet our achievement is around, depending upon the subject, between 15th and 26th, sometimes somewhere around Italy on average. And I think that we've been too incremental in how to try to improve education. We say we're going to lower class size some, but that only makes an incremental difference. We're going to build self-esteem. We're going to have teacher trainings. But I would like to propose something more radical. I call it super courses. I want you to think back to when you took algebra. in the 8th grade or 9th grade. Well, you're Mensa, so maybe you found it easy and fun. But many people found algebra, which is the supposed gateway course to success in higher education, getting into college and success in our ever more technocentric career. Many of them found it difficult. And it's understandable, because it's not for the average person that intrinsically interesting a subject. And the teachers who self-select into teaching subjects like algebra are numbers people more than word people. So they may not be the most transformational, inspirational communicators. But now imagine, instead of that typical, there are 47,000 algebra teachers in the United States. Instead of around the country, there you get a pretty much random choice of which ones you get. Now imagine instead you had the option, or maybe even were told you had to, take what I call a super course. Now imagine this. Imagine that we found, say, 3 or 4 of the most transformational, inspiring, fun algebra teachers in America, or the English-speaking world, or even anywhere in the world, because you could use translation. You'll see what I mean in a minute. And we put them in a room with somebody who's an expert at gaming from leading game companies. We said, let's divide up the algebra course into your favorite parts. Each of the 3 of you are going to teach the parts you like the best and teach the best. And Mr. or Ms. Gamification is going to make it ever more fun and interactive and visual and simulation based, etc. So this way, every student, rich and poor, from Maine to Harlem to Beverly Hills, could get world-class instruction. Compare that with the status quo. Would that not offer greater hope that all students could do better at subjects like algebra, and multiply it by, of course, all the other courses? So my number 4 wish is that we are less incremental and more radical around education, that we reinvented, and I would consider super courses at the core of that. My 5th wish for 2021 and beyond is to reinvent our system for selecting our political leaders. Really, were our 2 presidential candidates the best that America has to offer? The problem is it requires 4 years of press the flesh to rich fat cats, to other special interests, and to just get to be a city council member. And then you got to move up from there and do the same thing to be mayor, and to be a state senator, and then to be a US senator, and then to be the president. So that filtration process filters out wonderful people. Now, McCain and McCain-Feingold a number of years ago, John McCain, the Republican, and Russ Feingold, the Democrat from Wisconsin, made a number of year effort to try to reform the system even moderately, to get some of the money out of politics. But unfortunately, the foxes are guarding the henhouse, and there's a tremendous value of the status quo benefits the incumbents. So they're so interested in keeping their jobs that they're not going to vote for what I'm going to propose here. What I'm going to propose is far more radical than McCain-Feingold. I would argue that elections should all be 2 weeks long. And again, here's the liberal side of me, 100% publicly funded. It should consist of 1 or 2 debates. It should consist of a neutral body like Consumers Union, Consumer Reports, writing their voting record and platforms, widely publicized in the media, just like everything else is publicized in the media. That would take money out of the equation. I think we would get a hell of a lot better people running for office. It may not be able to be feasible across all offices. Maybe the city council is not going to happen. I don't even know. But certainly for many offices, I think that would greatly improve the quality of our leaders. Number 6. My 6th wish for a better 2021 and beyond is to replace our income tax with what is called a value-added tax, common in Europe. Think about all the time and all the money that is spent in record keeping and in tax preparation. And talk again from my liberal side, who can afford to do all that optimally? Rich fat cat individuals and rich corporations. It's not fair to the average person. And then, of course, there is all the cheating that people do to try to get around the system, even beyond what the loopholes that are provided. I would recommend, my wish, I guess, is to say would be to replace the income tax with a value-added tax. I'm going to oversimplify here for purposes of time, but bottom line, instead of taxing income, it would tax consumption. Now, to make sure it was progressive, again, this is the liberal side of me, all basic items would be exempt from the value-added tax, so that the poor who are buying basics were not taxed at all. And then products that were just above basic would be taxed a little, and luxury items would be taxed up the wazoo. So we'd have at least the same degree of progressivity. We could, if it was, depending on how it was enacted, the same degree of progressivity as we have with the income tax. And it would simply be taken, it's like you pay your sales tax. The VAT would be simply, added to the cost of every item you buy. So that's my wish number 6 for 2021 and beyond. And number 7, my 7th wish is that we adopt what is the most important lesson my dad taught me. And I'm looking at the time, we're doing well. So I'm going to tell the extended version of this story because I think it's powerful and maybe drives the point home more. Now, everything I've said to you so far, by the way, has been completely unique to this. I create every talk I've ever given. I like to create it from scratch so that it's fresh. But this is something that I've ended every talk I have ever given. And not just because I promised my father I would, but I believe it's got a very, very important message. The year is 1939. The town is Sierpz, Poland. My father was living in a halcyon, bucolic town. Nobody even locked their doors. And one day there was a knock on the door, and it was 2 Nazis in black boots. And unlike in the movies, they didn't yell. One was silent and the other whispered and said, "You will be out of your house with only what you can carry on your back by noon tomorrow or else." And then they clicked their heels, turned around and left. And the next day, there were not 2 Nazis. There were 12. And now they weren't silent nor whispering. They went into all the Jewish households and said, "Raus!" And all the Jews took their stuff, what they could, and there were 2 trucks out there. And they took all of the able-bodied people and they put them in one truck, and they put all the old people and children in another truck. And my father never saw his parents again. He was one of the, and it's a little apocryphal, but I believe he was one of the 50 some odd men who escaped from the Panari death camp by digging a tunnel. And this I know for sure, at least from my father's reporting. My father said he lived in the Black Forest thanks to the good Christians who took care of him. And then he was dropped on a car after the war. He was dropped on a cargo boat and dropped in the Bronx without a penny to his name, no money, no English, no education, no nothing but the scars of his Holocaust tortures. What did he do? No job was beneath him. He took a job sewing shirts in a factory in Harlem. And at night, did he say, "I'm exhausted, I'm tired, I'm a Holocaust survivor, I'm going to go and get drunk"? No, he went to Roosevelt High School, night school, to learn English, because he knew unless he spoke good English, he would always be relegated to a low-income job. And that's where he happened to meet my mom, an Auschwitz survivor, who also was there to learn English. What did he do on Saturday mornings? Did he say, "I'm exhausted, I'm going to watch Saturday morning football. I'm a victim, I'm a Holocaust survivor"? No, he went to the owner of the factory and said, "Can I take the shirts I sewed for you during the week and sell them out of a cardboard box on the streets?" And he did, and he bought them for $1 and he sold them for $1.50. What did he do with the money? Did he say that I'm now going to spend it and have a good time? No, he didn't want to live in the tenement in the Bronx that he, my mom, and my sister lived. It was under the elevated train, roaring 24/7. And he wanted to get us out of that bad neighborhood. And he saved up enough money for the first and last month's rent on the only store he could afford, 105 Moore Street. It's still a really tough neighborhood. You can Google Maps it. 105 Moore Street in Brooklyn. And it was on one side of the store, it was a little clothing store. On the one side, there was a Puerto Rican deli specializing in chicharrones, which is deep fried pork intestines. And the smell of that came into my father's store, merging with the smell from the other side, which was a live chicken market, and the stale blood was merging with the chicharrones right in my father's little tiny store. So, but it was all he could afford. The store was so small that he had to store most of the merchandise out on the streets on folding tables. And on the weekends, I told you it was a tough neighborhood, the kids would come by and they would steal whole boxes of sunglasses, shirts, everything. He couldn't afford a security guard. So when I was about 12, I started to be his security guard on Saturdays. And the most memorable moment of my life was one day when business was slow and there was a parking meter in front of the store. And I remember having one elbow on one side of the meter and my dad having his elbow on the other side of the meter. And suddenly, when you're 12, you start to be a little less egotistical and you start to think about somebody else. And suddenly I thought, I said, Daddy, how come you so rarely talk about the Holocaust? And he stiffened, which is something he rarely did. And he said, Martin, the Nazis took 5 years from my life. I won't give them 1 minute more. He said, Martin, never look back. Always take the next step forward. And each and every one of us has had crap happen to us. But I have been privileged to having been career coach to some of the most successful people on planet Earth, as well as to some real strugglers. And one of the differentiators, in addition to intelligence like Mensa ability, one of the big differentiators is that the successful ones are far more likely to follow my father's advice. Stop looking back, always take the next step forward. And I think that is my wish. I think if more of us adopted my dad's lesson, stop looking back, take the next step forward, I think we would have a better world. And I can leave you with no better advice.
Thank you. We have one question in the chat room. If Arthur Zinger says, I want to hear his perspectives on the political and sedition of this week.
I am repulsed by that. Whether we call it an insurrection, it is a mob of right-wing crazies who have done immeasurable harm to both America as a whole and certainly to the Republican Party. It is indefensible.
Susan Heimlich asks about income tax replacement. What about stock market income?
It's a great question. I think that's one of those gray area questions that I don't have passion around the issue. I think there's an argument that unearned income, whether it be stock market or other kind of unearned income, should be taxed at a higher rate. That said, so ethically that feels right. Earned income, you should be allowed to keep more of your earned income than money that you got sitting on your butt. That said, once we open Pandora's box to exceptions, I worry. That said, I'd be quite open to a discussion. I mean, that is a wonderful question. And I think that's the kind of nuanced discussions that should be had.
Roberta asks, how can we unite as a country?
It's a great question. Wonderful question. I like to think that my first wish that we had more respect for the full range of the marketplace of ideas. Much wisdom, as I've tried to stress, much wisdom comes from left to center. I tried to point out when I kept saying the liberal side of me, the liberal side, the liberal side of me. I am one of these mushy moderates. But I also believe there are some views right of center that are worthy of discussion, and I'm particularly concerned when those get squashed, when those don't either get censored or censured and the people get censored. So I think we need to embrace the time-honored valuing of the full marketplace of responsibly held ideas. No, not Proud Boys, not white supremacists, not the hard left that wants to, Antifa that wants to kill people. Responsibly held positions from left and right should be honored with respect and the exchange. I loved Susan's question. Because I made no mention of unearned income like stocks. What a lovely question. Because that position comes from a liberal perspective. It's great. So let's have these kind of interesting, important conversations, because that will both bring us together and lead to a better society.
Mickey asks about censorship and politically correct thinking. What should we do about social media?
It's an excellent question. Oh, I love Mensa. That's why I've been a member since 1974. Those are great questions. Do I have a pat answer? Absolutely not. I am not one for big rule setting. I am one for discussion. So I think a more full-dimensioned discussion among us privately and in the major media about the responsibility of social media, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Parler on the right, to welcome to welcome the widest range of responsibly held ideas from left and right. We're all emotional by nature. I'm an emotional person. I like to think I'm rational, but I'm also not one of these calm, laid back people. And so whether the message is delivered with passion or with equanimity, all well-intentioned ideas that are not stupid. There are stupid ideas. I'd be dishonest to say that all ideas are smart. They're not. But all well-intentioned, reasonable ideas should be welcomed, respected, and honored. I have been to so many Mensa events, dinner kind of events, and lunch events, where there's profound difference between them among the people. And 100% of the time, we leave that lunch or dinner as friends. I know I'm being maybe a little idealistic, but I like to think that Mensa, in many ways, provides a model for how the broader society should exist.
I have a question from Brad, and it may take 2 readings. Thoughts about behavior biopsychological education, early grade school, high school. Folks don't seem to know themselves well, much less the difference between projection and reality.
Great question. Great. This gets to both two separate sub-questions. The nature-nurture controversy and the extent to which our existing measures of personality are valid. And the answer is, again, forgive me for being a wishy-washy moderate, but that's really where the science, forgive me for using that term, that's where the science is. There's no question we are a blend of genetics and environment, both. Nobody is purely environmental, purely genetic. And the personality tests, which attempt to categorize us in a box, I mean, and the science is pretty unambiguous that the Myers-Briggs, for example, which tends to put us in 14 and 16 boxes, is utterly invalid in predictions. I think at this point in time, the world of understanding of what makes us tick is in its adolescence. We can ask more of it than is extant. I think those are excellent research questions. I would like to see better research on what we know about our biology, what we know about what really matters in education and in other environmental things. And we need a whole new generation of personality tests because the current crop is notably lacking in validity. It's more like, we are so desperate to know ourselves, understandably, that we grasp onto whatever available in the same way as back in the 70s, where they came up with this fraudulent Laetrile, which was apricot pits as a cure for cancer. People were so desperate they took it, even though it was fraudulent. Our personality tests aren't that much better than Laetrile.
JC asks, did your dad ever speak of his feelings about the eventual successful prosecutions of some World War II Nazis?
Excellent question. No, I don't know why. All the questions have been great. Thank you all, by the way. He was, frankly, like me, I am him, very focused on just doing his job. He did not want to live in the past first. And he exhausted himself working, I swear, 7 days a week, long days. He couldn't afford a car for a long time. All he did is focus on putting food on the table and donating money to charity when he could. He didn't have much. He was a mensch in my term, but he was not political in any way. He did not look back. He did not go to Holocaust remembrances. He did not follow the Nuremberg trials. He just was very focused on being a mensch.
Okay, we don't have any other questions. And so I want to thank Dr. Marty Nemko for his giving us his views and wishes for 2021 and beyond. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks all for joining. Appreciate it.